Hi, welcome back to Nonprofit Productive. I'm Mike St. Pierre, your host, and in this video, I'm having a conversation with Chris Wood of Effective Faith. Chris and I talk about how he integrates his faith with his productivity, and we also geek out related to an app that we both really enjoy for note taking called Upnote. If you enjoy the video, and you know what, even if you don't enjoy the video, make sure you like it and subscribe. Thanks for watching. One. Hi, everyone. This is Mike from Nonprofit Productive, and we're back with another expert interview. This time it's Chris Wood from Effective Faith. You've probably seen his blog posts, you've heard his podcast, and some of his fantastic videos on YouTube specific to Upnote, an app which we both really enjoy. And we'll talk about he's coming to us late on a Friday night, so very generous with his time. And he is an expert in productivity. And so I'm really excited to talk with you, Chris. And what would you add to that introduction?
Well, firstly, I want to say it's really great to be here. So thanks for inviting me. And I've loved listening to your podcast over the last few weeks or so as well. So thank you for all of that. Um, I think it's probably worth saying that I'm based in the UK, and yeah, I've been doing the sort of the blog stuff in a serious way for 4 months or so, but had been sort of toying with it a bit before that. I'll say more about that as we go, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I think you've got a real knack for it. And we're both people of faith and we both really love technology. So I think we have a lot in common. And, I really think that you have a very important voice in this sense, Chris, because for people of faith, our the way we view the world informs our work. And it's not
yeah,
like,
very
okay,
much
we
so.
have our faith and our relationship with God over here, and then we have our work over there and family over here.
Yeah,
It really gets to be very infused, ideally. And so I think that that comes through in the way you talk about productivity. It's based in principles, it's
yeah,
towards higher things, it's towards a meaningful life. And so I
yeah,
really think that's exciting. Let's get right into it. And Effective Faith is this platform that you've built, and certainly others before you and me have been talking about these things. But I think
yeah,
you're
yeah.
putting a new spin to it. So tell us how Effective Faith got started.
Yeah, so I guess I've been one of those people who's toyed with the idea of having a blog for a long, 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 long time. And I played with various stuff on WordPress for a few years. Effective Faith, the idea, it sort of began in November 2021. I think it was about then. There were a couple of reasons behind it. So at the time, I was working for a local church. My job title was church manager. I was doing all of their sort of operations, admin, logistics, sort of managing all of that kind of stuff. And I worked with a lot of young trainees, people who were coming through the church's ministry training scheme, who had a lot of ministry gifts, um, straight out of uni, a lot of zeal and a lot of gifts, but seemingly less and less idea as to how to organize themselves, how to manage their time, how to manage their commitments, and how to actually get stuff done. Um, I used to think of it as if they had like a really powerful engine, but no grip in the tires. And so you get a lot of engine revs, a lot of smoke, but no actual momentum or progress. um I should, full disclosure, that was very much me years before, because I did the same training scheme. But in taking the role on of church manager and all of the stuff that I was doing, I had to learn how to manage and keep track of a lot of different things, a lot of different plates spinning in the air. And I learned quite a bit about how to organize myself and how to manage all of that. So what I did was I wrote a seminar on productivity, time management, keeping track of all the various different commitments that I used to give to these trainees each year. Uh, and they seemed to really value it. So I cooked up the idea of starting a blog, which, as I said, I did. Um, I think the other side of it is in sort of midway through 2021, I kind of burned out in a fairly serious and major way. And there were a lot of factors involved in that, but I came to the conclusion that part of it was to do with what I now would call sort of a toxic productivity stint, where efficiency, always being on top of everything all of the time, becomes something of an idol, in terms of how you see your identity. So I ended up leaving that particular job and having some time off. And in part, effective faith is kind of my attempt to work through how to manage a lot of stuff and get things done without it becoming such a dangerous, such a damaging thing as it had done in the past. And I guess, people say do this kind of thing in public. So that's sort of what I'm doing, and I'm writing about it. I started giving more significant focus to it at the start of this year, I think, when I built the website. Before it was a blog on Medium. I've recovered quite a bit, and so I've been able to do that, which is what I've been doing. I called it effective faith, as you said. I'm kind of using it as a means of merging those ideas of productivity and getting stuff done, but also having humble dependence on God. I'm, as you mentioned, I'm convinced that the key is to intentionally focus on and give time to the things that are important across the whole of life, and not just work all of the time, and to be able to do that in a sustainable way over the long term. And part of doing that is accepting the limitations we have, whether that's just sort of natural human frailty or our own individual weaknesses and different skill sets and things like that. And then being able to trust God in that, and in the trust in the things that we're not able to get done, as well as in the things that we are. So yeah, I want to say I love your idea of calm productivity. That's exactly the sort of mindset that I think is really key here.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think a lot of us are kind of writing for ourselves in addition to our audience. And I think when we blog or podcast or we do videos, we're thinking, we're processing, we're sometimes teaching, and it clarifies things, I think, in our noggin, and it reaffirms, I think, certain patterns that could be helpful to other people. And it's, it's interesting. You're talking about burnout within a church setting. Most people in ministry and in other, forms of nonprofit work, there's no training at all in terms of efficiency or productivity. There's lots of emphasis on theology, which is good. There's a lot of emphasis on theory, which is good, but that does run out at a certain point. And I don't mean like God stops providing, but passion alone does have a shelf life, and it's like a garden. It has to be nurtured for the long haul. And that's something that, I talk about a lot, that we want to help people be productive for the sake of others, and within a ministry context, also to the glory of God. It's not just, we're not just doing this for ourselves, or we're not just doing this to get more done. We're doing it to make a bigger difference in the world. And like you're saying, our time on planet Earth is finite, and so why wouldn't we want to, make the most of it? So I think, again, I just want to affirm that I think your thinking in public is working, and you're the second person I've spoken to today who's had an experience of burnout and has used it to help others. So I really, give you kudos for that. Let's shift gears and talk about one of the tools that you are really an evangelist for, and that's the app called Upnote. I use it also. I am not nearly as well versed as you are, but I really like it a lot. It feels light, but yet very capable.
Yeah, yeah.
It's almost fun to use. It doesn't have the sort of baggage of Evernote and the positives and negatives of Evernote and other tools
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that. So let's go there. You know, did you go to Upnote kind of as an exodus from Evernote, or did you just stumble upon Upnote and you just really took to it?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the answer is a bit of both. So I've been an Evernote user since 2011, although I think probably for the first 5 or 6 years, it was installed on my computer, and that's kind of as far as it went. Um, I think particularly through lockdown, app switching with Notes apps was a big thing. I had a lot of frustrations with Evernote, and I tried OneNote, but OneNote I also had frustrations with, particularly the way in which the desktop apps and the mobile apps are so different, and they don't necessarily work that well together. But so I searched and tried every note taking application under the sun. Um, I do love Evernote. I think it's a fantastic application, but most people who would be listening to this will understand no app is perfect. They all have big frustrations for everyone who uses them. Um, I think my desire to sort of move on from Evernote came into a bit more clear focus when I think it was late 2020 they released Evernote 10 and started releasing new features like tasks and home and all of that kind of thing. And I was thinking, this is really good, but they're taking the app in a direction that is not where not where I'd want it to go, and they're releasing features that I'm just not going to use, and that seems to be where they're putting all of their focus. Um, I tried Notion, which seemed to be the big alternative, but I could fill a whole podcast on my love-hate relationship with Notion and all of the different issues there. And yeah, I it was about a year ago. I can't remember at all how I found Upnote, and I remember being really surprised that I'd never come across it before because I'd Googled every notes app under the sun and it just hadn't come up, but then all of a sudden it did. Um, and my initial response was, yeah, this has got everything I want. This seems to do everything I want. And the lifetime subscription was, at the time, it was £16.99, which is probably around about $15. And you think, well, that's that amount for the whole of your life compared to Evernote, which at the time was like 70 quid a year. And you just think, it seemed like A, it was worth a look, and B, it was probably a no-brainer. So I kind of had both on the go for a while, and I was using Upnote for a lot of writing stuff, and Evernote for the rest of note taking and everything. But in the last 6 months or so, I ported everything across pretty much. I still need to go through all of the various notes app I've used over the years and purge them because I've got stuff everywhere, which
Mm-hmm.
is not a good situation to be
Yeah.
in.
Are you using Upnote in terms of a second brain, or is it simply a place for notes?
Um, yeah, so I mean, Upnote it's intended to be a note taking application, so it can't do everything. So I use Todoist as a task manager, and I still use Notion a little bit for managing content to a degree, although I'm trying to work out how to move away from that. But yeah, I've got all of my planning for days, weeks, months, years, projects, everything is done in Upnote. I've got some sort of basic dashboards that I've made. I've got something which I call a command hub, which kind of guides me through the day and keeps me focused on the things that I want to be focusing on. So it is kind of, Upnote is the hub now, and Todoist is just there to provide a organized list of what I'm gonna do. Um, yeah, it's definitely the key part,
Mm.
I would say.
It's an exciting app, and I think Francesco has reviewed it, and a lot of people seem to be catching on that Upnote is a very powerful app, but it's lighter. It feels faster, simpler, but it's no slouch. And
No, no,
I'm
not at
really
all.
going to be watching it carefully. I'm hoping that the company grows because I want to use it more. But I'm
Yeah,
happy with how I'm using it now, and it's
yeah,
fun
yeah,
to learn from you and your videos. I think you had one recently about sort of this dashboard approach, and that
yeah,
was a fantastic use of Upnote, I think.
yeah. I mean, you can't have all of the sort of filtered views and linked databases and all of that kind of stuff that you can do in other apps. But I sometimes have wondered whether or not creating those takes more time than it saves.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
whereas in Upnote, as you can see in the video, I just basically use their collapsible sections and tables to organize things in a visual and structured way to make it a
Mhm.
bit easier to see at a glance what I want to see. Um, yeah,
Chris, let's talk about, kind of leaping off of the title of your platform, Effective Faith. Why do you think some people in ministry tend to push back a little bit at this idea of effectiveness in ministry?
yeah, I do. I totally understand that feeling and where that comes from. And I think in a lot of ways, it's absolutely right. In ministry, it's really hard to measure uh, progress or outcomes. In some ways, it's actually impossible because with mere mortal eyes and without sort of perfect foresight into eternity, it's very hard to sort of measure how effective you're being. You can't measure the impact of sermons or pastoral care in the immediacy or in the long term. I mean, in a former life, I gave a talk to a small group of 5 or 6 non people, students who wouldn't have called themselves Christians about the Christian faith. And I have never in my life seen 5 people who appeared less engaged and less interested in anything that I was trying to say. But years later, I was told by one of them that that talk was sort of like the beginning of a turning point for them.
Wow.
And you would never have guessed that at the
Mhm.
time. And then I've also sort of read the Bible with somebody who was incredibly engaged, but then would now call themselves an atheist. It's impossible to measure your effectiveness and your impact. But in some ways, when I talk about effectiveness, I'm not really talking about measurable outcomes and sort of results. I'm talking about being intentional with the use of your time. And I think this is especially key for people in ministry.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, being considered and not just reacting to whatever we see first and whatever is shouting the loudest.
Right.
I don't know if you can relate, but my experience when I've been involved in ministry and certainly the feedback I've got from other people is that ministry is full of things that are in your face and shouting very loudly. And you can't ignore them, but you also can't ignore the more discreet
Mhm.
and quieter things that are important but not so in your face. So yeah, I would see effectiveness as just
Mhm.
thinking through those sort of considered choices about what's important and then using your time accordingly. One of the things that's constantly on my mind, if you have a family, um, you're not going to be very effective in that sense if your every waking moment is in the study or meeting with your congregation and you're never at home in the garden with your kids playing. That it's that kind of thing,
Right.
and just taking it all in. Um, yeah, I would also say with this kind of stuff, we've been given a mind, we've been given the ability to sort of think, and I think as we do need to be careful with a lot of productivity advice out there to an extent. I think I see a lot that sort of tends towards selfishness. I don't know if that's something that you would see and sort of living your best life for your glory, for want of a better
Mhm.
term, and inflating our own importance. But I think there is value in taking on board some of the core wisdom that you would find in productivity advice to use those finite resources we've got to better effect. Yeah, I think that's where I would go with that.
I would agree. And I think it's important to be cautious about the people that we um, listen to and watch online. Not because they're bad people, but the experience of, it seems like, many quote unquote productivity experts is very different from that
Yeah,
of you or me or whomever. And for example, um, you have kids, I have kids. The demands of having a job, being a parent, being a spouse, having a home, having
yeah,
activities, that's totally different from being single and 22. you know
yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
like, literally totally different.
yeah,
Or And so I think that it's not that a father of four can't learn from, name the person,
yeah,
or vice versa. It's just that I think we should just pause a little bit and pump the brakes on some of these people who are really talented and really successful in a worldly sense, just because their experience is just so different. I had a friend years ago, and she really loved to learn from Saint Therese of Lisieux, and she read everything that she could about Therese and just really felt drawn to her theology and her spirituality and the way she prayed. And years later, I went to that same friend and I said, "Are you still, kind of an aficionado of Therese of Lisieux?" And she said, "No, I think Therese kind of messed me up because I spent so much time and energy trying to be just like her.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
realized that God has uniquely wired me to be me." And
yeah,
and so, it's, again, I think we learn from the Ali Abdals, the David Allens,
yeah, yeah,
name the person. They're all super
yeah,
smart and have something to offer. And it's probably, our system is going to look different from theirs,
yeah,
and we may have a different calling on our lives. You
yeah.
mentioned burnout, and I wonder if you could just speak to those nonprofit and ministry people who are watching this and listening to it. Speak to those who feel overwhelmed and really burdened by everything they feel that's on their plate. Um, what would you say to them that's a word of encouragement?
Yeah, I think I was thinking about this quite a lot earlier. I think there are sort of two things that you might want to say or to consider. So, there would be things that you could say that would be sort of at the level of advice or tips and things like that. And I would come to that at a moment, but I wouldn't want to start there because I think, in a sense, that's just perpetuating the problem. And certainly for me, um, whenever I felt stressed or overwhelmed, my solution was to try and tweak my system to make it more comprehensive and more all encompassing, and to enable me to sort of manage more. And in a sense, the solution was just perpetuating the problem. um Ministry is hard work, and if you're working for a charity or a not-profit or whatever, then you more often than not would have more than one thing that you're focusing on, more than one role and thing that is your responsibility, because funding is tight. And it's a long slog in both of those environments. The needs, the demands, they don't take a holiday. You have to, but they don't. um, and it can feel like if you do take a holiday or if you take a break, then all of those needs, all of those demands are still going to be just waiting for you when you get back, rubbing their hands with glee that, fresh meat. um, a phrase that I have heard, I don't know if you've ever heard this, a phrase that I've heard people say to me, possibly more than any other, is, once X, Y, and Z is finished, then things will calm down a bit. And to be honest, it's not just people in ministry that say that. I don't think
Mhm.
we all do. And so we continue flat out through one big deadline, one big project, one big crisis after another, and things never calm down. And so before I would give any advice or sort of top tips for managing time or anything like that, I would say we can't wait for things to calm down um, before we think about it. I think part of the problem is culturally things are different than they were in the past. The connected nature of the world that we live in means that we have access to a lot more all of the time, and a lot more has access to us
Mm.
all of the time. And I don't really mean sort of in the terms of data privacy, although that is a separate issue, but I mean that, you know, your projects, your tasks, and the people that you work with, effectively you're carrying them around in your pocket all day, every day, and they're next to you by your bed when you're asleep. And anyone and everything can get access to you whenever they want to, really. I was listening to a podcast yesterday by a guy called Carl Pullein. I don't know if you've come across him.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about watching a TV show that was set in the 1970s, and the pace just seemed a lot slower. You know, if you
Mm-hmm.
wanted to contact someone, you'd write them a letter.
Mm-hmm.
2 or 3 days later, you would get it. They would get it, and then you would expect a response like a week or so after that. Whereas now, somebody sends you a Slack message or an email, and they expect a response within a few hours.
Right.
Um, so I think, as hard as it may be with all of those demands, we need to start trying to think about our lives and ourselves differently. And that's where the sort of the faith side of effective faith in the name comes in. That's that sort of humble dependence. We need to recognize that it doesn't all depend on us. It can't all depend on us, and it shouldn't all depend on us. Now, as I was thinking about this, I know that for some people, when they're working alone, or if they're sort of like leading a small team or whatever, it can very much feel like it does all depend on you. But in some ways, if we're in ministry, it can be easier because we sort of accept that the results don't depend on us, that they can't be measured by us. We depend on God for those. They're in the hands of God. But we still sometimes operate as if it does all depend on us.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be talking about being, lazy or sloppy or anything like that with work, but trusting God with our limits.
Mm-hmm.
And accepting that we have limits, and accepting that there are things that we can't be everywhere and we can't do everything, and being able to be content not just with the things that we are able to achieve and accomplish, but also with the things that we can't and that we're not able to achieve. I was really struck. I just want to say, I've got no idea which episode it was, but I was listening to your podcast as I was driving the other day, and you were talking about going on vacation. See, I'm using the Americanism there, and trusting your team to do their job. And that being a key thing to help you disconnect and switch off whilst you were away. And I think that's really important. If there are people around you, you're working with others, then basically trusting them to enable you to get away and take a break and rest. I think one big thing that I would say is, I think if we feel like, or if others around us are telling us that we're close to exhaustion or burnout, then we just need to listen to that.
Yeah.
And taking a proper break is an essential first step. I think my own experience would tell me that the small amount that you gain by continuing to push yourself is lost when everything comes to a grinding halt for months.
Right.
Yeah, I mean that would be
Yeah.
possibly the most important thing.
No, that's great. That's great counsel. I mean, I know my wife sometimes will say to me, like, you're getting kind of cranky. What's going on? And like you're saying, that's a voice that I've learned to listen to.
Yeah,
And we do have limits. I think it was Jason Fried of 37 Signals. One time I heard him say, when they look at a day and if it's a quote unquote good day, they'll tell their folks at 37 Signals, did you put in a good day's work? Did it feel like
Yeah,
a good, like a solid day's work? And it doesn't necessarily have to be intricately defined, or but I
yeah,
think everybody knows, what, I put in a good day's work today.
yeah,
I felt it, and I did my best, and I
yeah,
did what I could, and I'm just going to have to trust my team and
yeah.
God to do the rest. Chris,
I
so
think
grateful. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, like one of the things I've said many times in different forms, I think we tend to plan our time as if we're Superman and we're going to get green lights all the way. So we're able to do what we want to do quicker than a normal human being would be able to, and there's never going to be any distractions or interruptions, and that's just not realistic. So if I was to give one piece of advice, it would be trying to work out what is an actual realistic expectation, and as you said, being content that was a good day, even if you didn't get 50 things done. The fact that you did
Right.
10 things well is a good day.
Yeah, that's 200 things a month. If you're
Yeah,
cranking
yeah,
that Monday through Friday, that's pretty great.
yeah,
I mean, that's over 2,000 meaningful activities a year. That's fantastic, and
yeah.
that's really how the needle can get moved. Chris,
Mm-hmm.
how can folks find out more about you, about Effective Faith, the YouTube channel, Upnote, your podcast?
Yeah.
Really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show today.
No, that's great. Thank you for asking. So the best place is the website, which is effectivefaith.org. So all of the content is posted or linked to there. There tends to be sort of like a blog post or something once a week. A bit less often now, but maybe once or twice a week, I have like a short post which I'll put up as well. In addition to that, there's a podcast, as you said there. You can find that on the website. It's also on like Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you want to find it. And then yeah, the YouTube channel. That is obviously linked to on the website as well, but it's just the Effective Faith YouTube channel. If you search for Upnote on YouTube, I tend to be like third on the list with like my 10 videos on Upnote.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the best way to find it. The YouTube channel is going to sort of start developing now, as I've done the tutorial on Upnote, and I'm now moving to sort of other things. As I said to you earlier, Upnote is the hub, so that's still going to be key.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll show how I use it with the other things the other tools that I have as well. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook, so you can follow me there. If you just search for Effective Faith, it'll come up.
Chris, thanks. Really appreciate you giving the time.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and as I said, love your podcast, and I'm looking forward to the next episode.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Not